Many Star Trek lovers have mixed views about the father-son relationship between Spock and Sarek. We're going to look back at this father and son relationship to show the love Sarek has for Spock. You might ask how this will be determined. We are going to use the child's hierarchy of needs to help us determine this. We're going on a retrospective of the original, the animated series, The Next Generation, Search for Spock, Voyage Home, Final Frontier. Unfortunately, we will not cover my favorite Star Trek movie, which is The Undiscovered Country, but we will see clips from Discovered. It is true, we have heard passing statements about this relationship in several episodes. However, this retrospective will not focus on those comments because they weren't true interactions between these characters. For instance, Spock mentioned his father in the Carbonite maneuver, but Sarek was not there to respond in any way to comment, defend, or to find true depth between these characters beyond how just one character feels. However, covering Vulcans is, well, different. What must be understood about Vulcans is that their culture is completely different from a human culture. Their thoughts are much more private and guarded. What matters is the actions that Vulcans take. So, let's get started. In the original series, Journey to Babel, Season 2, Episode 10, the original issue between Spock and Sarek is when Spock chose not to go to the Vulcan Science Academy. Instead, he chooses to go to Starfleet. Sarek shows pride in Spock's abilities by chiding Amanda about embarrassing him in front of his colleagues. After Sarek's heart attack, Spock proposes using his blood to save his father's life. Now, here it is clear that the two men love each other. Otherwise, Spock would not have fought so hard to give his father his blood. What comes shining through, however, is the end of the episode when the two start making fun of Amanda in a lighthearted way. This episode touched on many different themes, but probably the most important is the love of a son for his father, despite their hardships. However, when Sarek chided Amanda for making him feel embarrassed, this touches on Spock's self-esteem. Sarek was conscious of Spock's need for self-esteem. However, Sarek chose not to mention that in the presence of Spock. The question is whether or not this counts. To viewers, it counts because we know what's in Sarek's heart. But for Spock, he has no idea. In the animated series, Season 1, Episode 2, titled Yesteryear, Sarek is telling his young son, Spock, that once you choose your path, you cannot turn back. You will have to decide whether you will follow human or Vulcan philosophies. Spock, who has returned from the future to his past, is speaking with Amanda. He tells her it is difficult for a father to bear less than perfection in his son. He also tells Amanda that Spock will find his way. Later, once Sarek realizes both Spock and the cousin Sulek, who is really Spock many years in the future, are missing, he asks the authorities to begin a search. Finally, when Spock has secured his future, he turns to Sarek and implores upon him to try to understand his son. Sarek agrees. However, he does comment how strange of a request this is, but he will honor it. What is important here is the fact that Sarek is concerned about Spock's safety. We know there are several things that a parent must give a child: food, water, clothing, shelter, safety. This is clearly important to Sarek. Also, he gave Spock a choice in his destiny, his agency. This is the ultimate expression of self-actualization. He allowed Spock to decide for himself which path to take, which speaks to the creative pursuits of Spock. In Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, Sarek asked Kirk why he hadn't brought Spock's Katra back home. Here we see Sarek is mortified about the eternal rest for his son. This touches again on the social needs of his son Spock. He is addressing Spock's peer and friend, knowing Spock would have shared his Katra with his closest friends. This shows that Sarek not only approved of his friends and peers, but had expectations placed upon his friends, which is an element of social needs that parents must provide their kids. In Star Trek IV, Voyage Home, Sarek spoke on behalf of Spock's friend Kirk, no doubt in response for saving Spock's life. Note, the crew of the Enterprise stayed on Vulcan while Sarek went back to Earth. This sounds like aiding and abetting, which could be a serious charge if not for the fact that Sarek is an ambassador. While Spock did not violate any Starfleet or Federation laws, Spock's friends did. By speaking on behalf of Kirk and the other officers, Sarek was providing safety for his son, tending to the social needs of his son, and one might argue the self-actualization of Spock. Remember, Spock had to regain his memories and also had to regain his logic. By allowing Spock that time to collect himself, he was tending to the self-actualization of Spock. Also, Sarek admitted that when it came to his son, logic can't be used. What Sarek was simply stating is that he loved Spock, and emotion would always be a factor. This is an expression of loving interaction between the father and son. Also, in the movie, Spock acknowledges his father's effort. Sarek says he is impressed with Spock's effort in this crisis. This expressly goes to the self-esteem of Spock. He is encouraging and has respect for Spock. Sarek acknowledges his earlier decision about Spock's enlistment in Starfleet and says his judgment was incorrect. Stubborn is a word we might associate with Vulcans. For a man of such esteem to admit this sort of a thing is monumental. It speaks to the respect and approval he has for Spock. In Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, upon the birth of Spock, Sarek says, "So human." This statement, for many, has been considered a source of pain for Spock. It can be argued Sarek did not show unconditional love to Spock at this crucial time in Spock's development. In Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 3, Episode 23's Sarek, it is mentioned that Sarek attended Spock's wedding. We know Sarek attended when Picard recounts being present for the occasion. Also, Sarek says he loves Spock through a mind meld Picard had with him, which allowed viewers to know how he truly felt towards his son. Again, this shows Sarek is responding to the social needs of his son when he was present for his marriage with T'Pring. Also, Sarek wants to heal any rift that may still remain now that he is suffering with the disease he has. And at the height of his emotional ordeal, Sarek refused to see Perrin, his second wife, and Picard until his son's name was heard. His entire demeanor changes. When Picard asks what or who Sarek would have gone to Romulus for, Sarek says he must have gone to see Romulan Senator Pardek. He specifically says he wanted to give Spock the benefit of his experience of knowing that Pardek had no support at home and that nothing could be done. He says Spock never listened. What's important to note here is that Sarek, at this moment, did not allow his son to learn his own mistakes. This, no doubt, sent blows to Spock's self-esteem. However, we all know Vulcans are stubborn. Spock went on unperturbed. However, Sarek will not accept Spock would have defected to Romulus. He has faith in his son that no matter the situation, Spock would never defect. Even in Sarek's mental state, he was concerned for the safety and security of Spock. Sarek said Spock would always disappear for days when he was a boy going into the mountains, refusing to say what he had done there. Sarek would forbid him to go. Spock ignored him. Sarek would punish him. He'd go again. Secretly, however, Sarek admired his determination. What is important here is that by punishing and forbidding Spock to go into the mountains, he was attempting to provide safety and security for his son. Sarek intellectually admired Spock for his determination. However, he did not express that to Spock in the next episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Unification Part 2. Spock says he had the ability to see beyond pure logic, while his father would have considered it weak, yet Spock thought of emotions as a strength. Sarek would have thought of reunification as a fool's errand. Also, Sarek found his arguments with Spock to be useful. Once Picard and Spock mind meld, Spock learned how his father felt about him. Though Sarek was not able to express these emotions to his son, while both were alive, through Picard, Spock finally knew what his father thought of him and about these issues. He learned his father had nothing but respect, love, and admiration for him. It's quite unfortunate that Sarek could not have expressed those thoughts to his son himself. In Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, we learn Spock has an older brother by the name of Sybok. Little is known of their relationship, but it can be assumed it was a strained one since Sybok rejected Vulcan logic and was banned from their home world. We understand here how important Vulcan logic was to Sarek. Star Trek the movie, which came out in 2009 and part of the Kelvin universe, gave a glimpse into their relationship as well. I get it. The Kelvin universe is not the Star Trek you grew up with. However, one could argue that the ultimate personalities of these two characters were not measurably changed until later in Spock's life. Up to this point, most of these two characters likely would have had the same personality traits. In an early scene in the movie, Sarek tells his young child, Spock, that marrying Amanda was a logical decision since he was an ambassador. This does not give us a whole lot other than a lack of emotion on the part of Sarek. However, what it does demonstrate is that his adult caregiver, his father, chose someone with whom he could father a child and attend to his physiological and security needs. This is especially important since he is half human. Sybok was not raised with Sarek, so why should we assume Sarek would have married the human woman if he didn't have to? As an adult, when admitted to the Vulcan Science Academy, Spock declines his admission when it was insinuated that his human side was a weakness. Sarek reminded him he had made a commitment to follow the Vulcan way. At this moment, it could be argued that Sarek immediately understood Spock's reaction, and instead reminded him to continue to follow the Vulcan way, which could have been either a creative pursuit or hobby on the part of Spock. This lends itself towards Sarek continuing to encourage Spock's self-actualization. However, many would have seen this as a lack of respect for Spock's decision-making. Later in the movie, Spock has an emotional outburst. Sarek tells Spock to speak his mind. Spock responded by saying that would be unwise. Sarek's simple reply was, "That which is necessary is very unwise." Sarek further tells him that he is a child of two worlds and that he is grateful for that fact and for Spock. Sarek wants Spock to feel his emotions and confides that he loves his mother. What we learn here is a father encouraging his son to seek out his emotions. This is indeed showing respect for his son's human half and allowing him the space to learn on his own, thereby boosting Spock's self-esteem. In Discovery's Season 1, Episode 6, titled Lathe, Ambassador Sarek is on his way to meet with two independent factions of Klingons to form an alliance to win a war. There was an attempted assassination of Ambassador Sarek by Vulcan purists unhappy with Vulcan's relationship with the Federation, specifically with humans. Sarek shared his kachel with Michael Burnham. Before saving him, it is learned that he had to choose one child to go through the Vulcan Expeditionary Group and chose Spock over Michael, which caused Sarek great shame over the manipulation of the matter. So let's pause here. While I said I would not cover events that did not involve the two people involved, this does tell us a great deal about the relationship between Sarek and Spock. What it shows here is that Sarek is providing encouragement and protection from discrimination of other Vulcans towards his son. What must be understood about Vulcans is that their culture is completely different from human culture. Their thoughts are much more private and guarded. What matters is the actions that Vulcans take. Sarek thought to further the esteem of his child, who had committed himself toward a life of Vulcan logic. In Season 2 of Discovery, Episode 1, titled Brother, Sarek says he had not expected to see Spock again. Of course, so did Michael echo the same thought. It could have been commentary about Sarek's recent brush with death, or more likely, the strain between the two of them caused by Spock's decision to forego the Vulcan Science Academy. It had been years since the two spoke. In a private conversation with Michael, she asked Sarek what he wanted Spock to learn from her. His quick response was empathy. He wanted Spock to interact with humans. Sarek further explained that while Amanda is human, he could have learned empathy from her, but he also has reverence for her and could not have successfully learned empathy in the way he could a peer or sibling. However, he noted Spock may not have ever fully accepted Michael. What's important for us to understand here is the fact that Sarek is putting the social needs of Spock ahead of the needs of Michael. Also, he wanted his son to learn empathy. Empathy is something that comes once your physiological and safety concerns are met. It happens when you're allowed to socialize with others and develop your own sense of self-esteem. In Discovery's second season, Episode 7, titled Light and Shadows, Spock was presumed missing after allegedly killing 5 Starfleet officers. Sarek performed a ritual known as Takmor to help bring lost souls back home. When Amanda takes Michael to see Spock, Michael tries to get Amanda to get Spock to a hospital. Fearing Spock's safety, Amanda invokes diplomatic immunity. Sarek arrives and reminds them both that he would have to concur with that act. Sarek ultimately bends to the wishes of Amanda when she reminds him of Spock's learning abilities as a child, and Vulcans did not want to help him. Sarek suggests that instead of simply handing him over to the Federation, that Michael should hand Spock over to Section 31. Sarek emotionally proclaims he is not ready to lose both his children on the same day. There are several things to note here. It is clear that Sarek's first intention was his duty to the Federation. However, when reminded of Spock's upbringing, Sarek was forced to conclude that it would not be wise to simply hand Spock over, especially considering the fact that Vulcan purists had recently tried to kill him. Spock, after all, is the living embodiment of what Vulcan purists were fighting against. In this moment, what is important is that Sarek ultimately decided on providing the physiological and safety needs of his son. The health of Spock was paramount. His safety, in the hands of the Federation, was a concern. Attempting to split the difference, Sarek decided the best course of action, handing Spock over to Section 31, would save both of his children. By admitting he was not willing to lose both of his children, he was showing unconditional love for them, which shows he cared about Spock's social needs. In Discovery Season 2, Episode 11, titled Such Sweet Sorrows, when speaking to Michael, Sarek says, "It is the secret wish of parents that their children make right the mistakes parents have made." For his failures, he humbly asked both Michael and Amanda for forgiveness. Michael then asked Sarek to take care of Spock, and he replied he will always be there for Spock, even as he keeps his distance, as Spock has asked. In this moment, Sarek is attempting to have unconditional love for his son despite being asked to stay away from him. Additionally, his statement shows that Sarek would protect Spock from danger. This also shows that Sarek respects Spock's decisions in this matter, and that speaks to the self-esteem of Spock. The relationship of father and sons have been fraught all throughout history. It could be argued that no such relationship is perfect. Now, in the next retrospective, we will look at the relationship between Worf and Alexander, so stay tuned for that.